The chosen paper was a clinical study published by the Indian Journal of Public Health Research and Development in 2019. The paper's abstract details the background, aim, study design, method, and results. The study design is described as a cross-sectional descriptive study that investigates a link between sleep abnormalities and academic performance amongst medical and non-medical students enrolled at Management and Science University, MSU. The critical appraisal will examine and evaluate the content presented within this article by using the McMaster's quantitative to judge the information. The McMaster will review the significance of the article and will support improving reliability. This technique was an appropriate critical appraisal tool as the study design of the article was cross-sectional and descriptive. Kady and others researched to address the concerns of university students and sleep. The article was written to address a gap discovered in previous literature. This mentioned literature discussed only medical students, whereas the article was intended to study daytime sleep behaviors between non-medical and medical students. The clinical study was grounded on some appropriate previous literature and current knowledge that focused on sleep disorders, use of technology, university schedules, and smoking. However, some of the cited literature addressed high school sleep behaviors and exceeded 10 years since publication, leading to questioning relevance and whether more recent and appropriate literature is available. When researching the topic broadly, external factors of sleep abnormalities were not explored specific to university, as social expectations, relationships, and well-being are an essential aspect of a student's quality of life. Existing literature and studies were briefly reviewed, but there was no in-depth discussion on the clinical importance of this study, concluding that there was little evidence of a clear and compelling justification for why the investigation was being conducted. However, adequate literature references were provided to justify the collection tools.
To assess the outcomes of daytime sleepiness amongst medical and non-medical university students, Dellebaite and others used a cross-sectional study design to gather the sleeping and academic data used in this study. Cross-sectional study designs are used effectively to measure the exposure and outcome of participants at a single point in time. The selection of a cross-sectional study was appropriate for this study as, by definition, it coincides with the objective of the overall study as it analyzes two variables at a single point in time to identify any relationship between groups. This study used the Epworth Sleepiness Scale to evaluate the effects of daytime sleepiness on academic performance of students. This was used in conjunction with a cross-sectional study design to evaluate the results. A cross-sectional study design was used in this study over the likes of a case control study or cohort study, as it was targeting a specific group of students at one point in time instead of over a period of time. It grouped the data to find trends between the two variables rather than comparing the odds of one variable impacting the second variable, validating the appropriateness of the study design selection. Some strengths of conducting a cross-sectional study include being quick and inexpensive to conduct, and results can translate across other study designs. The study was completed using structured questionnaires focused on covering all variables on socio-demographic, lifestyle, and sleeping patterns of the sample group. Also, the study was successful in concluding and synthesizing the results captured in the cross-sectional study. It was a successful method for identifying the prevalence of daytime sleepiness amongst medical and non-medical students, drawing a succinct conclusion on outcomes at that single point in time. Alternatively, minimal limitations were identified in the study. However, some standouts were the inclusion of more females than males in the sample group, and vague definitions for poor and excellent academic performance within the groups. The participants of this study were selected on the basis of inclusion and exclusion criteria to have an exhaustive study group which investigated the relationship between the daytime sleepiness of students and their academic performance. A response rate of 76%, narrowing the sample size from 200 to 152 male and female students from the ages of 19 to 27. The mean age of the sample group was 22.6 years. The 76 medical and 76 non-medical students were contacted with the quota sampling method. The inclusion criteria involved students currently enrolled with a bachelor program, mentally stable, and were cooperative between the ages of 19 and 27. The exclusion criteria encompassed staff and outsiders of the university and those who were uncooperative with the data collection method. Bias. The potential for selection bias was addressed in this study by establishing specific inclusion and exclusion criteria. Purposive sampling was identified as the group of interest was targeted based upon the inclusion and exclusion criteria. It was implied that students over the ages of 27 and students who worked at the university were not included in the study. This cross-sectional study was an observational study where the investigators did not alter the exposure of the outcomes of the population sample to avoid any measurement bias. The participants' sleepiness was measured using the validified Epworth Sleepiness Scale, which was a uniform 8-part questionnaire which was given to all participants to complete. All participants completed the same survey and were subject to the same data collection methods. From the 152 students involved, classifying them into medical and non-medical students eliminated the possibility of misclassification to avoid measurement bias.
Due to the nature of the study, the results were collected at one point in time between the months of May and June. These results were collected through structured questionnaires, the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, and pulling results from the participants' past academic years. The variables covered in this study were socio-demographic and lifestyle characteristics, sleeping patterns, and academic grades. To gather information of relevance, participants were asked questions in relation to their age, gender, major, whether they have a diagnosis of a sleep disorder or use a stimulant to stay awake, if they get enough sleep, their average hours of sleep per night, and whether they take regular naps or not. The Epworth Sleepiness Scale assesses how likely the participants are to fall asleep while sitting and reading, watching TV, sitting inactive in a public place, as a passenger in a car for an hour without a break, lying down to rest in the afternoon, sitting and talking to someone, sitting quietly after lunch without alcohol, and in a car while stopped for a few minutes in traffic. The participants are given the choice of would never doze, slight chance of dozing, moderate chance of dozing, and high chance of dozing. Both the short and long-term effects of daytime sleepiness were considered in the study through the discussion around students' current academic grades and sleep disorders that could become apparent. The sleeping disorders discussed throughout the study can create numerous negative consequences if left untreated. The outcome measures used in this study are of relevance as they focus on an individual's occupational performance and performance components in relation to their successes at university. The questionnaire is classified as well validated as it has a specific focus on socio-demographics and lifestyle of the participants. This study was granted ethical approval from the MSU Ethical Committee. In order for a study to be classified as ethical, the Ethics Committee should look at the following issues: scientific design and conduct of the study, recruitment of research participants, community considerations, care and protection of research participants, informed consent, and confidentiality issues. In order for eligible students to participate in this study, they needed to be mentally stable and cooperative, and additionally, the information shared by the participants were required to be kept confidential.
152 students of the MSU responded and completed the survey from the original population of 200 students. Data was displayed using 3 tables. These tables consisted of demographic information and sleep-related study variables, a cross-tabulation of daytime sleepiness and good or poor academic performance, and the results from a chi-square statistical test on the relationship between academic performance and daytime sleepiness. A summary of the results shows that medical students have a higher prevalence of daytime sleepiness compared to non-medical students. Table 2 depicts that 86.9% of students that experience daytime sleepiness also have poor academic performance. Therefore, only 19.1% of students who experience daytime sleepiness also have a good academic performance. By conducting a chi-squared test, the correlation between daytime sleepiness and lower academic performance was shown to be statistically significant, with a p-value less than 0.001. Although clinical importance was not addressed within the article, these results show how daytime sleepiness can impact on gaining clinical experience. The study clearly identifies how lack of sleep or experiencing daytime sleepiness can have a detrimental effect on the academic performance on future medical practitioners, as the study sample was made up of 50% of students in the medical field at the university. Within the article, it is assumed that medical students are more likely to experience daytime sleepiness and poor academic performance due to their busy schedule and needing to get university work done at night time. A potential random error, also known as chance, may have occurred whilst recruiting the population of non-medical students. As stated, 76 non-medical and 76 medical students were recruited for this study by using the quota sampling method. This means that random error could have occurred whilst recruiting the non-medical students, as the people within this population will not be from the same degree. It is assumed that there is a lot more variation in sleeping schedules and types of academic requirements within the population of non-medical students. As the population of non-medical students would encompass a wide variety of degrees with many different types of needs and requirements, by comparing a very specific medical student lifestyle to the lifestyle of every other degree, this may not give an accurate indication of the academic performance in relation to daytime sleepiness between the two population groups. There is no evidence of confounding present in the study, as there is no third variable being observed.
Within this study, the authors discussed the certain criterion which was used. This criterion included medical students and non-medical students. The results of this study were clearly presented and were evaluated in comparison to other studies which also presented findings on the relationship between sleep and academic performance. When certain conclusions were made throughout the discussion, reasons for these conclusions were clearly presented and recommendations were made about what further information would be needed to draw an extremely accurate conclusion. It was concluded that certain reasons for medical students experiencing more sleepiness than non-medical students could have been due to the utilization of memory and brain, causing the medical students to feel fatigue not only in physical part but also mental part, in which give implication towards the sleep-wake cycle. Furthermore, the reasons that non-medical students may not have experienced as much daytime sleepiness as medical students was because the syllabus learned by those non-medical students might be straightforward, and like the students were not under pressure to handle the situations as those in medical students who need to face weekly test and examination. In further support of these statements made, evidence was supplied through additional literature to support their hypothesis. As well as this, the significance of the findings were clearly stated and were also evaluated in comparison to other literature, where statistically significant findings of the relationship between daytime sleepiness and academic performance were present. Certain biases that may have been present haven't been evaluated throughout the discussion. These biases include, but aren't limited to, recall bias by the participant, volunteer bias, and selection bias. Recall bias may have been present throughout the study, as the times of replying may not have been within a time frame where information could be recalled accurately. As well as recall bias, volunteer bias may have been present, as the volunteers who participated may have been more eager and motivated to express their opinions. Selection bias is present within this study, as certain populations may have been avoided in the selection criteria of this study. For example, only selecting students from a specific university and not including a multitude of different university students. The certain limitations which are present throughout the study include the fact that the majority of the participants were female, the non-specification of how poor or excellent academic performance is measured, as well as what is considered to be good or poor sleep within the study. The study concluded that there was a significant link between daytime sleepiness and academic performance in medical and non-medical students. The authors articulated this significance clearly and provided explanations as to why medical students may experience more daytime sleepiness than their non-medical counterparts. This conclusion made was consistent with the results of the study. The authors have also discussed the implications of these findings with regards to practice by suggesting that they provide health educators with good sleep as an additional positive reason to promote engagement in health behaviours. The gaps present in the literature were also acknowledged, and the authors recommended that the causes of sleep deprivation be investigated more to be able to understand how specifically practices could be altered to support students experiencing daytime sleepiness.
The McMaster's quantitative is a critical appraisal tool that is accessible and relatively easy to use just by filling out sections of a form. A section of the McMaster's review form is on the slide to provide clarity. Through the application of the form, it ensures a thorough analysis. The criteria to fill out the form were completed with ease as Galea followed Dellebaite and others' study. To make the critical appraisal technique more practical for a cross-sectional study, intervention could be replaced for a discussion section as it is more relevant and would provide more simplicity when critically appraising the discussion. Broadly, the McMaster's quantitative tool is a high-quality tool as it is uncomplicated, accessible, and easy to apply. To apply, check if this tool is appropriate. A checklist under the sections comprising yes, no, and not addressed. This provides a simple overview determining if the article criteria were not being met. Conclusively, the McMaster's quantitative critical appraisal tool was grounded from the McMaster's guideline, which can present further detail into each section and explain different biases. Hence, the ease of the usability when endeavoring to generate a thorough and accurate appraisal, especially for beginners. Thank you very much for listening.